Smart Growth in Denver. She is an expert in anything sales, and she will be talking to us today about how you can build an accountable sales program in your business to motivate your staff, track your progress better, and increase your bottom line. So Pam, if you're ready, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you, Stacy, and welcome everybody. It's my pleasure to present to the B.O.S.S program, and I am a huge fan of the Alternative Board and all its programs. So I applaud all of you for taking advantage not only of this program, but of their broader opportunities. As Stacy mentioned, my background is in sales, and specifically sales management and helping small companies to build systems so that they can grow their sales. Let's start off with talking just a couple of minutes about what accountability is. And I'm going to use my own terms. I'm not going to jump out to the dictionary and see what they're saying. But I think accountability has three components. The first is clear two-way communication. So when you're setting up a sales program, what we're looking for is clear expectations of each salesperson and each team member. The second component of the accountability would be monitoring, so that whatever you monitor becomes what you can expect, and if you quit monitoring something, then it goes away. And the third component is feedback, and as the author of the 1 Minute Manager, Ken Blanchard, says, feedback is the breakfast of champions. And I think that's feedback to your salespeople as well as feedback up to management, so that they have
Pam,
a good understanding of where they stand.
Sorry, Pam, I'm not sure if you meant to be on your next slide. We just can't see it yet, and I do have somebody saying that they can't hear Tim. I'm not sure if you're dialed in or have it on mute. Can somebody just let me know if they can hear us? Okay, great. Sounds good. We'll carry on, and Pam, just letting you know we were still on the first slide.
Yes, and I'm going to move to the second slide right now.
Excellent.
Well, I think I'm going to move to the second slide right now. There we go. So the first component of accountability that I want to dive into is measuring leading indicators versus lagging indicators. Let's just touch on the lagging indicators first. I know that for many companies, invoices mean a lot, and that owners in particular like to measure invoices. But in the sales world, that's really a lagging indicator. That's telling you how effective your salespeople were working in the past. And in order to manage the invoices, then you need to switch your mindset and start focusing on leading indicators or managing what's happening today in the sales world. And today is really always the key in the sales world. Sometimes we're tempted to jump ahead and do a lot of planning, or to look back and do a lot of grousing, but I always want to emphasize that focus on today. So with salespeople, we'd like to focus on what their activity is today. How many phone calls did they make? How many meetings did they have? How many proposals did they write? How many wins did they get? And the wins are really kind of the lagging indicator, but that leads us down a pipeline. So the crux of all sales results are outbound activity. What did you initiate through your office? So when you're looking at phone calls, yes, you want to measure the incoming phone calls, but more importantly, how many outbound calls did your salespeople make? And cold calls are not the most popular term, but they are a necessity in order to grow your sales. I have a little rule of thumb that whenever a new salesperson starts working for me, I require them to start making cold calls the very first week that they're on the job, because I don't want them to get into the habit of not making calls. And the general rule of thumb is that a salesperson can make 50 to 100 phone calls a day if they don't have other sales activities that they're participating in. So think about if you have a brand new sales employee on board, you're going to take them through the orientation program for your company, but then it's important to get them on the phone and start making those outbound calls. And until those calls are yielding meetings and proposals, they need to be spending most of their time outbound on the telephone. On the screen right now, I'm showing a case study from an actual small company that's based here in Denver. And on this graph, if you first of all look across the horizontal axis where we have the numbers 1 through 24 listed, look right around the 12-week mark. And what I've done with this company is that I've graphed their cold calls, meetings, proposals, and total activity versus the dollars that they brought into the company for 12 weeks before they started measuring on a daily basis how much activity there was, and for 12 weeks after they started measuring. And just by focusing on the two blue lines, the cold calls and the dollars brought in, you'll see that the process of measuring activity led to better results for this company. So that drives home one of my points, which is sales is a discipline. It's not about being persuasive or charismatic. And hopefully from this graph, you can see that by applying discipline to the process, you've not only achieved more activity by your salespeople, but you're bringing in more money to the process. Another sidebar that I'll take note of here is that I find to hold salespeople accountable, the best method is to ask them daily and weekly to be telling you how they're doing. So it doesn't work to get to the end of the month and measure their activity at that point. I want them to be telling me every day what's going on. And there's some tools that I use to go along with that. Let me just ask Stacy if there's any questions before I go on to the next slide.
Yes, Pam, actually we have a question from Diane from your previous slide. Are phone calls and emails counted the same way, or are they different?
Yes, well, that's a good question. I would consider each of those to be one-point activities. And I like to assign point values, so 1 point is a phone call or an email, 2 points is a meaningful conversation, 3 points per hour to work on a proposal or go to a meeting. That way I'm communicating effectively to the salesperson how I value the different activities that they do. But I do want to throw a caution out there that too many people are falling back on emails and not doing enough outbound calling. And I find that salespeople who make phone calls and follow up the phone call with an email have the best result. The reason for that is very simple. Some of us process auditorially by talking on the phone. Some of us process by reading. And when you make the phone call and then follow it up with a email, you're giving your client or prospect the opportunity to process it both ways, and hopefully one of those two ways is their preference.
Great, thanks.
Okay, so I just had mentioned that I look at daily and weekly rhythms with salespeople, not monthly rhythms. The first meeting rhythm that I try to incorporate is the daily huddle. Generally, it works to do this from like 8 to 8:15 in the morning, If you work in a virtual office or you don't require your salespeople to come in, you just simply provide a conference line for everybody to call into. If you're all in the office together, I recommend that you just stand up and do the daily huddle. And when you do that huddle, there's only 3 questions. You go around the room, and the first question is, what did you accomplish yesterday? The second question is, what is your focal point for today? And the third question is, where are you stuck? Now, oftentimes, there may be a temptation to take some of these points down a rabbit trail, which will expand this beyond a 15-minute huddle. And that's your job as the sales manager to manage that. What I like to do is just to have each person report out, and I'll go through those 3 questions again in a minute. And then I, as a sales manager, can walk away from that huddle, and I know where I need to follow up with people. So the 3 questions are, what did you accomplish yesterday? What's your focal point for today? Where are you stuck? And don't spend a lot of time processing where you're stuck in the huddle to waste people's time. By 8:15, everybody's off and moving to their appointments and calls for the day. And as a sales manager, I can touch base with people as I need to. I personally have tested this system and found that I can shave up to about an hour and a half a day of my management time by doing this huddle first thing in the morning. But the even bigger benefit is that after 7 days, nobody comes to the huddle without something to report. So everybody's feeling accountable every day because they know they have to report something in the morning at the group huddle. The second meeting rhythm that I incorporate is the weekly sales meeting. And I look at the calendar and I say, when are our prospects least likely going to need to talk to us? And then that's where I schedule the sales meeting. Now, for quite a few companies, that's Monday morning. Most businesses don't come in and start calling their vendors at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock in the morning. So I will generally schedule my meetings for 1 hour, let's say 9 to 10, 10 to 11. But, you know, I work around people's workflow, and it's important to have the sales meeting at the same time every week and also to have the same agenda every week. The purpose of the sales meeting for me is to instill a little bit of competition and peer pressure into the group. So we do go through the metrics and the pipeline, and I'll be displaying for the whole group to see how many phone calls everybody made last week, how many meetings they had, and how many proposals they wrote, and what wins they had. And then we incorporate celebrations. So you get extra attention if you have written the biggest proposal ever written by the company, or if you've made more outbound calls than anybody's ever done, or if you're the champion of proposals for the week. And again, the whole idea behind the weekly sales meeting is to still a little bit of competition among the group. The third weekly rhythm that I incorporate is a one-on-one meeting with each sales person. And there's 3 conversations. First of all, we look at your pipeline. That's where I go through. We do a lot of pipeline cleanup at that point. They forecasted a proposal with too high of a percentage, or they haven't cleaned up. They still have something old sitting out there that shouldn't be there. But more importantly, we troubleshoot or talk through each of their accounts, and specifically I want to talk through their top 3. Excuse me, I had to wet my throat.
I have a couple of questions here.
Sure.
So Paul has asked, he said, how does your daily huddle differ from a daily scrum? Like, do you have tips for maintaining momentum when the sales process is slow and seemingly not working?
The daily huddle is very similar to the daily scrum, and the huddle is important every day, but particularly when you're not achieving results. Again, people aren't going to come to the huddle day after day after day without something to report.
Okay, I hope that answers your question, Paul. Lauren has asked about using Salesforce. I'm not sure if you want to address that later on, Pam.
Yes, I am going to talk about Salesforce in a few minutes.
Okay, great, thanks.
So I was talking about the weekly one-on-one meeting and going through the pipeline. Specifically, I want to go through their top 3 opportunities in the pipeline. And what I find is critical there is identify what the next meeting is, where they are in the stage of making a decision, why the probability is set at the probability level that's been defined. And then that almost always rolls into some role playing. And what I have found over and over is that salespeople need help to find the appropriate language and to practice that. So I'm going to go to that next on my slides. I just want to wrap up this conversation about the weekly one-on-one. Is that recently I was engaged by a client to do 16 one-on-ones a week with their salespeople. So they had 16 people on staff. Each of them had a one-on-one meeting. There was sometimes a temptation to cancel the one-on-one meeting because there were more important client obligations. However, I found that the top producers for this client had salespeople who wanted to have their one-on-one meeting every week. And so I really have become hardcore about these one-on-ones. When you skip the one-on-one, nothing good happens, even if you're skipping it so that you can take care of a client obligation. So let's go into role-playing a little bit more. Just like in sports, practice, practice, practice are the 3 things that you need to do to stay ahead of the game. As I mentioned earlier, what I find is that salespeople need help developing the language. And so for cold calling, I ask them to write out their scripts, and I make them practice with me before I'll let them call actual customers. So they have to get signed off by me. Generally, I have them get signed off by somebody else in the company as well. And over time, what happens is that they get sloppy about their scripts, and then they find that their outbound calls are less successful. And so by constantly role-playing with them, we're keeping that saw sharpened so that they don't take that path. Then with meetings and presentations, I also ask them to do practices with me. If they're a new employee, we actually script out the process or outline the process. I have them watch somebody do a presentation or a meeting, then I have them help them do a presentation or a meeting, and then I have them take over the process and give them feedback before they're turned out on their own and they go out to make their own meetings and presentations without somebody from management being there. So let me ask there, Stacy, this is a good time for questions. Should we take any?
Yeah, we just, Don has asked, does expecting people to attend regular meetings like this, does that make, if they're independent contractors, would that make them employees?
That's a great question. I think that your HR department needs to address that specifically, and I know there's a preponderance of activities that have to occur for somebody to be an independent contractor rather than an employee. But in my book, just because they're an independent contractor, I would not let them off the hook on meetings. These are really critical to results.
Sounds good.
Okay?
Yep,
So now I'm going to talk about the CRM, or the Customer Relationship Management Tool, and reporting. And I believe that every organization needs to have a CRM tool. Salesforce.com would be one example. It happens to be very accessible and very affordable. So there are platforms within Salesforce that are smaller for micro businesses to use, and there are platforms that are bigger for corporations to take advantage of. And if you call Salesforce, they will walk you through to help you determine which one you need. This is by no means a commercial for Salesforce.com. I think that ACT is a good program. There's Sugar CRM. There's industry-specific CRM that work well. And for me, I don't care what the CRM is. I care that you're using it. I would extrapolate that one step further and say the best CRMs today are the ones that have mobile apps that your salesperson can access via their phone or their tablet. And it's also based in the cloud, because the last thing you want to hear is that a salesperson didn't update the CRM because they weren't at the office. There's three types of things that should be occurring that the CRM helps you manage. The first is all daily activities should be reported. You will get pushback on this, and I just don't accept it. The best companies enforce that the CRM is open at all times. And so the best practice is to, when you start your day, open up your CRM and log your activity as you go throughout the day. If you log it at the end of the day, you're going to miss something important. So you just log it as you go. It is your note keeper. The second facet of the CRM that we focus on is the opportunity list or the pipeline report. Every tool has something built in like this. And so I should be able, as the manager, to pull up all the pipeline opportunities for Mary Smith and John Doe and Teresa Jones, etc. And generally, we want those broken down by stages. So as an example, I may make a phone call this afternoon to somebody, and they tell me that they're interested in our products. And so then a meeting is set up, and I will log that as an opportunity, but it will be in the infant discovery stage. It won't be in the forecast or the closing stage. And then as that opportunity moves through the various stages, and I think that 3 to 6 stages is appropriate, then we'll continually update that opportunity in the CRM and be able to track it. And then the third element of the CRM that's important is goal tracking. So for each salesperson, they should have a quota, and when they sell something, then they log into the CRM to report the sale, and that should tell them where they are against goal. So if they've sold $1,000 out of a $10,000 monthly quota, it'll show their dashboard as being at 10%. Any questions or thoughts there that we want to handle?
Yeah, we just have Richard asking about your experience with Salesforce One, and if you know of another CRM package that has a better mobile app.
The salespeople that I'm working with directly love Salesforce One, and in my personal experience, I don't have anybody else on a different mobile app, but I wouldn't take that as the final word.
Okay.
And maybe somebody on the call has a better idea. To wrap up on the CRM, I will tell you that one of the things that I find interesting is when I interview salespeople, I always ask them, how would you like to be managed in your role? And almost always their first response is, well, the CRM is my manager. I say that just because I know that salespeople know that they're being monitored through the CRM. And while it takes more management than just the CRM, it's a tool, I think there is an expectation that there's a good CRM available within your company and that you will be using it. Now, the way that I use the CRM is I am not checking every day to see every activity that gets logged. But I find that when I randomly check and ask questions about what I see in Salesforce or whatever CRM, that the quality of the information that's being put into the tool is much higher. And when I'm not randomly checking, like if I'm gone for a week on vacation, the quality seems to decline. So that goes back to that daily and weekly focus that you need to have when you're managing salespeople. It's not about what did you do this month, but it's about what did you do today and what was the quality of what you did today. The next tenet about accountability in your sales program would be working closest to the dollar. And I want salespeople to have some sense of organization, so I do check with them in interviews and in my one-on-one coaching every week on what are they using to manage their time, and I'm checking to make sure that they've got some kind of a daily priority. When they're setting their priorities, we want them to focus on closest to the dollar. So the first thing that they should tackle each day is what proposals are about to close. Maybe they wrote a proposal, had a meeting yesterday, and they have 2 follow-up questions from that. Then that should be done first. The second priority after those proposals that are about to close if it happened would be to write new proposals. Then to schedule meetings, and then to make calls to warm leads, so maybe calls to companies that were inbound calls or that it's your second or third phone call, and then to do their cold calls. So I'm looking for a rhythm where they're always working on what's hottest first. And they may have to shift gears sometimes throughout the day. I find it interesting. I have one salesperson that I work with that comes in and does cold calls every morning. And what I find consistently happens is that loops are not closed around proposals that have been written or meetings that have been held. And sometimes meetings are even missed because they come in and start on their cold calls. So I always ask people to come in, evaluate your total pipeline, organize your day, and then dive in appropriately, working closest to the dollar. It is true that if you have a CRM, it will generate your activity list for the day. The problem that I see with that is it doesn't prioritize that activity list well. And so that's why I'm asking you to work closest to the dollar. Because if need be, and you have so many proposals and meetings to do, your cold calls can wait for a better day. In addition to that, I also find that you have to set weekly minimums for people. And I would say a weekly minimum is that you make, for example, 50 outbound cold calls. Because if you don't set those minimums, then people will get so engrossed in their other activities that they won't be generating new leads to come in, and those are really critical. So examples of weekly minimums that I use is 50 cold calls, 1 or 2 networking events a week, email touches, maybe some nurturing with white papers or webinars or something that gets sent out around content management. So how about questions at that point?
I think we're good. We have a couple that we're going to discuss at the end.
Okay. All right. So, coming back then to my conclusions, first of all, whatever you measure will improve. And then hopefully through this process, this conversation today, you've gathered that a good way to build accountability is to set up some standard measurements, to have some mechanisms, some technology in place in order to get those measurements and to look at those on a daily and weekly basis. The second point that I hope you walk away from is that sales management pays for itself. Even if you just go back to that chart where I charted activity versus dollars that came in, you can see that the process of adding some discipline helped that company to increase the dollars coming in dramatically. And I think that a company needs to look at having a working sales manager once they have 2 or more salespeople. And once you have between 5 and 10 salespeople, you're probably looking at needing a full-time sales manager who's not carrying a bag or working on their own book of business. It kind of depends on the business. The more complicated businesses will require a full-time sales manager around 5 people. The less complicated, you might be able to have as many as 10 direct reports. And then my last point is that sales is a discipline. A lot of times we focus on people who have a charismatic personality, and we say, oh, that person could sell anything. Oh, that person could bring anybody to the table. That person was just born a salesperson. They've been selling water to Eskimos for years. And the bottom line is that you really want to hire the person who's disciplined, who will fit within this accountability system. So you want somebody who measures themselves. And then when you start measuring them, it won't come as a big surprise. You want something who's good at time management, who can schedule out their future work. You want somebody who is focused on today. They're not living in the future. They're not running over to marketing trying to get this to happen or that to happen. It's really about being disciplined, and I have supervised some great salespeople who were introverts, and nobody would have ever said that person is a natural salespeople, but they were very successful in the process. So before we wrap up, why don't we just open up the conversation? We can take your questions. People may have comments that they want to make. I'm happy to help however I can.
Okay, so we'll just going back to your previous point about minimums. Diane has asked how many people that would you expect to get through on the 50 phone calls? She said, and how do you handle, excuse me, the constant complaint from salespeople that that no one's picking up? Do you leave a message, or do you have a specific advice to handle that?
Yes. Okay. There's lots of points to make there. So first of all, if nobody's picking up, then it's a numbers game. You just need to make more phone calls. I know last week I had salespeople saying, "Oh my God, this has been a terrible week to make outbound calls. It's getting close to the holiday and nobody's in their office." So you just need to make more calls. You always leave a voicemail. And so if you're leaving a lot of voicemails, it's not going to take as long to do each call, which means that you're going to be able to make more calls per hour. And you will, and we found this last week, you will start getting people on the phone. And I'm telling everybody right now, I know it's close to the holiday, but the people who are at work have time to talk to you, so keep making your phone calls. The second point I want to make is that a guy by the name of Jim Cecil out of Seattle has done a lot of work around nurturing, and he's found that it takes between 12 and 16 contacts to develop a client. So if you call somebody and you leave a voicemail, that counts as one contact. And then if you follow up that with an email, that counts as your second contact. And you have a 70% chance of securing a new client if you make 3 or more contacts with that client. So it's really important to just be persistent and to hammer away and to manage your mind. Don't let the negativity get to you.
Great, thanks. Going back to Tim asked a question earlier about CRMs. CRMs, it kind of sounds like they appear to be more useful for larger sales teams. What would you recommend for a small team of, say, 3 people on project-based sales?
Yeah. So I think we're past that. CRMs are for big companies. I am a one-person company, and I use a CRM because it just manages all my data for me more easily. I don't have to remember as many things. In fact, not only do I use a CRM, but I keep track of my daily activities. I have a graph hanging on my wall right here showing me my activity level and my dollars. And I know that when I don't keep that graph updated, it starts to decline. So I've become very superstitious about having that graph hung up, and it's the first thing I do every Monday morning. Sugar CRM gets some good feedback. Salesforce has a version that they'll sell to you for as little as $5 per month. And they have governors, so they only let you have X number of contacts. But for a one-person company, it works well. ACT is one that you can buy a single user or a multiple user license for. I think that the trend is definitely towards catering to the small company.
Great. Sounds good. And Lou's just commented that he found ACT really good for small companies as well. Paul has asked, for non-sales staff, how do you get them to start thinking like business developers? And perhaps as an extra to that question, Isu has asked if you have found paying commission a motivator.
I've actually been in that situation a couple of times where project managers had sales responsibility. And I think there are 2 things that worked well. First of all, at sales meeting every week we did some kind of a training, and I usually did that at the front end of the sales meeting so that I could shift their mindset out of managing projects and into sales. and get their thinking going. And it was really important that those be role-playing type of activities so that they practice the language that they need to use. The second component of that, it would be to make sure that your project managers have good time blocking. And they should start off every week knowing when they're going to work on their sales activity. So for example, the company I was with, we needed the project managers to spend 12 hours a week on sales activities. And I would ask them on Monday morning to block out their calendar by first looking at when are the project management tasks due, and then build their sales time in around that. And that seemed to work quite well. And again, when I wasn't checking to make sure they had their time-blocked calendar set up, then they didn't achieve any results. But if I checked on that sometime Monday morning, then they were almost always on track.
Great. And this, this might already fold into what you just spoke about. Dirk has asked if you are CEO, do you have key tools that you use to manage the sales manager, if that is not yourself?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so I would have a weekly one-on-one with the sales manager. I'm going to go through the pipeline for the entire group, not just for one individual. And I'm going to look at the total activity and go back to that graph like I showed on slide number 2 and ask to see a graph like that for the entire team. I also would participate in the sales meetings, ideally on a regular basis, but you may reach a point where you don't have the time or you feel like you're burdening the group, but I would definitely drop in from time to time so that they knew that you were checking in and you knew what was going on in sales.
Great. And I think we have one more question here from Michelle. Do you have any books that you recommend for salespeople? Off the top of your head.
Yeah, it's difficult to, every industry is different, but here are some of the ones, and I'm actually turning around and looking at my bookshelf. I think that Snap Selling by Jill Conrath and Agile Selling by Jill Conrath are excellent. I like Emotional Intelligence for Sales Success by Colleen Stanley. Daniel Pink wrote a book, and I don't see it here, but he wrote a sales book within the last couple of years that gets a lot of good feedback in the general media. And if you're in sales management, I think Cracking the Sales Management Code by the Vantage Group is an excellent resource that goes into more depth about a lot of the things that I've talked about today.
Great, thanks. It looks we do have
a
couple
here's
of
Daniel
people.
Pink's book. Daniel Pink's book is called To Sell is Human.
Okay, excellent. So it looks like that's it for questions. There might be some people that want to contact you about some more specifics, Pam. On the next slide, we do have Pam's website, blog, and email there. So you're welcome to check that out and shoot Pam a message if you have any questions.
Yes, I'm always open to help people, answer questions, pass on any of my experience. I know it's hard to learn how to be a great sales manager, and we all got here because somebody else helped us, and now I want to pass it forward.
Great, thanks, Pam. So take note of the email address on the screen. Just remember you will be receiving the recording later today, as well as the slides in PDF form if you want to check out some of this info later. On the next slide, we do have a link where you can check out upcoming webinars, as well as all previous recordings. all of our B.O.S. webinars are available to view on demand at thealternativeboard.com/events. And we would like to see you join us for our next session on July 8th. We'll have Jean Cook, who's a finance expert from TAD Tulsa. She'll be showing you how to make better decisions in your business and how to link those decisions to the financial impact. So keep an eye out for the email coming soon. Thank you again, Pam. Really enlightening session today.
Thank you, Stacey, and everybody in the group.
And if we can just reiterate your email address one more time.
Sure, it's Pam@smartgrowth, SMARTGROWTH.com.
Great. Thank you very much. And thank you, everyone, for attending. I hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.